and welcome to Sorrel's Project Management Times, the podcast which looks at the ins and outs of the project management world. Disclaimer, all opinions in this podcast are those of the individuals involved and not of any company they work for or are affiliated with. So, let's get on with the show. Hi all, welcome to Sorrel's PM Times, the podcast which looks at the ins and outs of the project management world. Today is a special edition where I'm talking to my fellow candidate for the APM's Board of Trustees, Darren Jaudrill. If you're a full member or a fellow, you should have got your nomination packs through in the last few weeks, and we thought we'd just have a bit of a chat about what we think about the project management world at the moment. We hope this will give you a feel of both of our candidacies. So this week I'm chatting to Darren Jaudrill. Hi Darren.
Hi Sorrel.
We decided to have a chat because we're both running for the APM's Board of Trustees. And I'm going to do a little bit of an interview first with Darren and it'll turn into a discussion. So first of all, I wanted to ask you about something quite exciting that's happened recently. You had a bit of a surprise, didn't you, from the Royal Society for the Encouragement of Arts, Manufactures and Commerce?
I did, yes. I've been admitted into the to the fellowship there, which was quite an honour, and it's in recognition of a lot of the work I've been doing around social development, in particular the development of project management, of apprenticeships, and generally of trying to increase opportunities for young people.
So how did that happen? Did you apply?
I was nominated, which is always a surprise. And
so you didn't know it was coming?
No. I was nominated. I was then contacted to obviously provide my personal details and some information, and then got the phone call to say that I'd been accepted.
Brilliant. So to start us off, just in case our listeners don't know, what is the RSA?
So they're an organisation that exists in order to further understanding around us as people and what we do, and to tackle those issues that impact upon us. So, if we were to look at current affairs, things like climate change, things like how we engage young people and how we develop as a society. So they exist to encourage all of that, and are quite a broad church in doing it.
So what did you do in order to be nominated?
I haven't read the nomination you're not to, but I can sort of hazard a guess, which is that I've been in and around emerging talent within project management for, I would say, probably around five or 6 years now. Started at Network Rail, where I started looking at ways that we could develop talent and attract talent at the emerging level, so sort of the junior project manager and project management assistant level, and mould them through their careers. That then led me into the project management apprenticeship, which was then launched by the APM. And sort of looking at ways we could adapt that apprenticeship and other qualifications for young people. I then founded a social enterprise, engaged with the specific objective to focus on enabling, encouraging and enhancing opportunities for young people and for also the ex-forces community, and used project management very much as the framing for that. Which meant that I launched a new apprenticeship program in London with the Mayor's Office called the London Major Programmes Apprenticeship, which was a big collaboration with Crossrail, HS2, Balfour Beatty, Thames Tideway, TfL, and the Mayor's Office. And the idea was to try and find solutions to this issue around social mobility, whilst also providing, a good source of resource for those organisations. So we attracted young people from various backgrounds and from disparate backgrounds, and in some cases backgrounds where they wouldn't ordinarily either pick project management or an apprenticeship or any one of those employers, and actually developed them over a 2-year period to to not only gain the qualification, but then to move on into sustainable employment. And then we upscaled that to prove that the model worked. We upscaled that for use with the civil service. And that sort of brings us bang up to date. So I've sort of been doing that for the past 5 years. And in between the scheme in London and civil service, I was actually one of the people quite heavily involved in the development of the project management standard, which is the new apprenticeship model launched by the APM, led by our very good colleagues up in Sellafield and many others, where I was quite focused in on the methods of assessment and how we could adapt the qualification so that it would be suitable for all and not just necessarily a traditional exam-tested way of doing things.
And I think this is where we started talking, is because I'm very interested in the APM's educational offerings as a whole, but especially I've been concentrating on the slightly later stuff, so the sort of certified project manager level stuff where you've been working for a few years, whereas you've been really involved with the apprenticeship, which really is the point where you want to grab as wide a variety of people, because the thing with project management is that we're serving the whole community, so we should really be representing the whole community in sort of strategically and bringing these projects together.
Yeah, I mean, I agree completely. My earlier career as a police officer, we would always say that policing and the police force should represent the community in which it serves, and I think that's a good model for any organisation, I guess. And I think project management is no different. That we should represent both the areas that we are developing these projects in, but also the community as a whole. We are a community of practice, and communities of practice exist to continuously develop, to learn, to challenge ourselves and others, and ultimately to deliver success. So I think it's really important that we use all the tools that we have available. And I think there's often been a misconception around apprenticeships, particularly that they're only suitable for necessarily blue collar or for trades, skilled trades. They're not necessarily seen as for the sort of vocational, professional sort of side of career choices, which I'm glad to say certainly over the last couple of years I think is generally changing now. And I certainly think the apprenticeship levy has helped with that. I think that it was a good move because it's encouraged people to take a fresh look at what they use to develop people. And certainly the project management apprenticeship, I mean, yes, clearly apprenticeships are at their best when they attract those people who, from the project management apprenticeship side of things, the school leavers, so the 18 plus kind of range, 18 to 24 kind of age range. However, that they are just as applicable and can be just as powerful at the more experienced end of the scale. So I've delivered apprenticeships to people in their 30s and 40s who are looking either to upskill and to laterally move into project management, or are people who are seeing it as an opportunity to branch into a new career, into a second career type situation. And I think that the more that employers utilize that tool as one of the tools in the toolkit alongside graduate schemes and internal training practices, we really can, really push the development of the project management profession further, which I guess is something that links to what we were talking about before with the RSA, is that I'm mad keen as mustard just to push and drive thinking and ideas forward so that we can be ultimately all the better for it.
Yes, that's brilliant. So I'm just going to wind back a little bit, because you mentioned a couple of things that not all our listeners may sort of have a good idea of what they mean or what you mean by them. So first of all, I've written COP. What does that mean? Oh yeah. So first of all, communities of practice. Personally, I see that as how do I see it? Yeah. So have you got a sort of a description of what you meant by that?
Oh, crikey. Now, this is where everyone who's listening sort of gets on the APM website quickly and then tries to see if I can quote the body of knowledge exact.
That might be what I'm doing right now.
Which I've never been able to do, as any student who's been taught by me knows. I always give them a definition and say, but go and look it up for the exact definition. I mean, a community of practice is a group of people. I mean, let's keep it at basic levels. So it's a group of people who have a common interest, a common profession, or a common job to do, and they come together to challenge each other on how is best to do something, or to share experiences of doing it, or in some cases to identify things that aren't going so well collectively and how they can collectively fix that. So it's a support network, it's a professional network, and it's a learning network. Yeah. It's very much the very definition of a dynamic learning model. I mean, it just helps further our own understanding.
And you can see them in businesses. We'll have a community of practice within functions, within the APM is one, or their specific interest groups could be seen as a community of practice. And I suppose the big thing is that it's mixing up not just sort of book learning, it's day-to-day learning on the job, learning through life, learning and sharing it.
Absolutely, and that for me is the most important thing. I'm of a mindset that says actually project management it's a profession, it's a vocation, and those that sit the many qualification exams, exams are great. They help us test knowledge, they help us test our retention of knowledge, but actually that's only a very small part. And when we designed the new apprenticeship standard, we actually acknowledged that and made sure that it was only a very, it was a significant part, but a smaller part of the picture. And that actually it's the experiential stuff around that that's more important. It's the behaviors and the skills that are more important. And we can only really test, if that's the right word, those by observing them, discussing them, sharing ideas and challenging ourselves. And it's that bit that I think's really vital for any profession, but particularly for our profession, and particularly now with all of the things that are going on and the challenges that we are facing as a profession. I think it's really important.
We've covered communities of practice. I'm just looking at the APM's website, and you've covered it pretty much. Before we go on to sort of talking about apprenticeships further, and sort of, because I really agree with everything you're saying, that the whole point of an apprenticeship rather than university is that you are learning on the job and you're learning from other people, not just from lecturers and books. But first of all, I just want to quickly cover the apprenticeship levy. Have you seen it making a difference?
Yeah, I have. I mean, the apprenticeship levy at a basic level, it's a levy, it's a tax on employers. So if as an employer you've got, I think it's an annual pay bill of more than 3 million, then effectively, automatically at source, 0.5% of that is taken as a levy. And that is taken by the government, but then they give you that back as a way of using it to contribute towards training. And that must be through one of the very many apprenticeship standards that now exist. And I think what I've seen is a shift change now in where people are identifying within their own organizations, okay, I've got this group of people here who have been doing a job or a task for a very long time. I now want them to do something else, but I need to skill them up for that. Oh, I can use apprenticeships for that. So they can actually put them on a training program that is paid for to all intents and purposes. Obviously, they have to make a contribution, but it's a third by them and 2/3 from their levy account that then they can use to upskill that group of people. So actually, I am seeing that, and certainly there are a number of large employers, the likes of Rolls-Royce, BAE Systems, and others, not least the civil service, who are using this as a way of saying, well, actually, not only can I attract new people into the organisation, and new being predominantly young people, but actually I can use this as a way of upskilling my existing employees, which is great, not only for us as a profession, not only great for them in terms of being able to retain talent, which is always tough, but also it's great for the scheme because it shows a different way of utilising what would be traditionally seen as a just simply a way of bringing new talent in.
I think it's brilliant because I entered the workforce in 2008, which obviously was one of the worst times to enter the workforce. And at that point, companies just weren't spending money on their employees as much. There wasn't those training programs. Most of my peers just sort of tried to stay in uni for as long as possible to keep out the workforce. And it's wonderful that the government's now sort of building up all this education and these skills and these communities of practice.
Yeah, absolutely. And I should thank you for saying entering the workforce in 2008 and making me feel nice and old. So, thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I still feel very young, so it's more of that than anything. So we talked about levies. So the project management apprenticeship. So this is something I know a bit about because I finished my apprenticeship a few years ago, obviously after 2008. Do you want to give us a quick sort of description of how you developed it so that it wasn't just exam based?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the good news for project management was that actually the existing project management apprenticeship had only been around for 2 years at the point we started working. So it only launched in 2011, 2012. So actually we had a good starting point, and a lot of work by the team at the APM had already sort of gone into it. So in some ways there was a good starting point. I think as a group, we all agreed, though we had that as a good starting point, we shouldn't necessarily constrain ourselves, and we should try and look at ways that we can change things. And certainly one of the big ones was exams. Certainly on the old framework, there were 3-hour exams in there. If you wanted the PMQ, there was another exam there. So it's actually very exam heady. And what we wanted to do is to make it as accessible and inclusive as possible. And the best way of doing that was, as I said, at that point, I'd been working around the London Major Programmes Apprenticeship. Mm-hmm. So I had direct experience of these young people and some of the challenges that people were facing. So we decided, well, actually, we wanted the vast majority of the assessment to be based on their performance in the role, on the job. That actually the portfolio of evidence doesn't necessarily have to be a portfolio in the traditional sense. So it's not necessarily that big hulking MBQ box file that you carry around with you, and emailing people saying, can you send me an email saying how great I did? There are more evolved ways of assessing that through observation, professional discussion, simulated exercises, all that good stuff. So actually, when you look at the new standard and look at the assessment plan, yes, there's an exam in there. There has to be an exam in there because that is the way that we test knowledge. But actually, it's in there as a gateway. Mm-hmm. It's the PMQ exam. We picked that. So it sits there as a gateway, which they sit very early on. So actually, it should all be relatively fresh knowledge. They're obviously fully supported by their training providers in achieving that exam. And then the rest of it, so the rest of the second year and actually a good proportion of the first year is all concentrating on doing the job, demonstrating you can do the job, being a bit critically reflective, and then pulling together the things they need for their what is deemed the end point assessment, which effectively is a presentation and then a professional discussion.
And I found my apprenticeship, I found it because we had quite a lot of the portfolio side of it, but it was before the PMQ got integrated. And I found with the portfolio, it really helped me later on, because I think one thing that's quite useful in your career is to be able to show evidence of what you've been doing to your line manager, especially when you're looking at things like pay increases or trying to go for new jobs. And it gave me that experience of consolidating my knowledge, looking at what I'd done and sort of turning it into something how I could show it to people. So other people could see what I'd done and what I'd achieved and what my skills were, which I think is something, if you're just writing exams, you don't quite get that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And what we should really be saying is that although we're obviously using the framing of apprenticeships here, I would say, and certainly as a line manager, as a mentor, that's what I'd want anyone in my team or anyone who's a mentee of mine to be doing, to actually show me, well, what have been doing. If we look at the progression through APM membership, it's about, acknowledgement of continuous professional development, your CPD logs and all of that. So actually, to be a professional, we shouldn't just be doing the job. Actually, we should be doing the job, reflecting on it as much as is possible. We're all busy people, but actually reflecting on that, logging that. What went well, so I want to do more of that. What didn't go so well, so what do I need to develop? Who could I speak to about how to develop that? And that then leads you down, particularly from an APM perspective, down different communities of practice and different networking opportunities where you can develop that knowledge. So I think if people have come through an apprenticeship, I think what we'd find is they're more aligned. I'm hesitant sometimes to say things like this because I'm sure there are many people that go, but that's not strictly true, and I'm sure there are always exceptions. But I think that if you've been through an apprenticeship and been through that method of assessment for a couple of years and you keep that up, that actually you'll find it far easier to progress through things like the new chartered, where you've got to be able to demonstrate evidence, things like full membership when you're due to become a full member. All of this stuff is easier to grasp and identify and grab hold of because you're in that frame of mind already. Whereas if you've been through a more traditional exam knowledge based kind of environment, actually it's quite tough because I think for a lot of people, when you sit the exam and pass the exam, you've got the certificate, so that's it then. That's it.
And
Job done.
And you've had to sort of memorise things. It's using a different part of your brain. Reflection is really hard, and it's something that you do need to sort of practice and have other people looking at your reflections and going, well, that's not critical. You've just said what you did. You haven't reflected on how that's developed you and what effect it had.
I mean, coaching is a big part of sort of a lot of the things I've written and spoken about at events is that, coaching, and with that I include mentoring, although it is slightly different, but certainly coaching is really important. And that anyone who is a coach actually has a coach of their own that actually you can sit with and say, well, this didn't go so well, and talk it through. A coach at its purest is actually a very, you could say almost very frustrating, because a coach never really gives you answers. A coach just keeps asking you the questions to get the answers out of you. But actually, when you do that, you are able to reflect on decisions you've made or actions that you took. And I'm always doing it because none of us are perfect. I've made some complete bloopers in my time and in recent times as well. And it helps you to identify, what did I do here? Why did I do that? What was the consequences of that? What could I have done differently? If I were there again, what would I do? And sometimes you have to assess that in two ways. You have to say, well, with the benefit of hindsight, what would I now do differently? But then it's always quite important to actually say, well, without the benefit of hindsight, what would I have done differently? So actually, sometimes we look at things in hindsight with sort of 20/20 vision, and we say, well, I know where I went wrong here. I should have done this, this, and this, and that would have got me to a better end result. But sometimes it's just as important to say, well, but with all the information and experience that you had to hand at the time, would you have done anything differently? And that's quite a powerful question, because we can always do things better when we know the outcome. But actually, without knowing the outcome, is there anything you would do differently? And certainly, I think critical reflection and being more self-aware help you identify those, and can only be a good thing for not only your own practice, but for the community of practice that you're within.
I really liked that. That's a good point. That you can kick yourself, but you didn't know all the facts then, and actually you may have done the right thing for what you knew. But then you can also reflect on how you reacted once you realised that you needed to go a different path.
Absolutely, yeah.
I like that. So changing the subject a little bit, I'm just reading through your LinkedIn. I'm really interested as to what you did for your doctorate.
Oh yeah, my doctoral study. So this was while I was at Network Rail, and I sort of got interested in furthering my own sort of knowledge and experience, and really quite eager to see different ways of doing things, and then found myself doing a doctoral study. And I started looking at the way that people react and the way that people behave within certain environments. So either as a team, as an organization, as an organisation within an organisation, which when we think of some organisations such as Network Rail and such as, I know, BAE Systems from where you're from, that actually we see them as an organisation, but actually they're so big that they're an organisation of organisations.
Oh yeah, I'm only in a very slightly different bit of the business from where I did my apprenticeship, but already the attitudes are very different. I came from quite an officey bit, and now I'm in a naval base, and people have to, their clock-ins, you know, that they leave at exactly 4 o'clock, and there's all sorts of things like that. Even though the overarching structure is the same, they don't have to clock out at 4 o'clock. That's just a very practical sort of example. But yeah, it's completely different.
Yeah, so I started looking at sort of how people behave, what influences and impacts on them, and then based on that, how do you set up a professional community of practice? How do you set up a profession, and how do you encourage that? And questions around discretionary effort. So those people that, despite not being paid any more for it, or not having anything in addition to what they already have, that actually they spend a lot of time doing things above and beyond. You know, what is that? What causes that? As opposed to people who do a day job and that's it. And neither is better than the other. That's the important thing. Neither is better than the other, because we actually need a bit of both. But what is it that prompts that behaviour? So that's sort of what some of the questions I started looking at within the doctoral study.
Okay, that is really interesting. I want to read it now. Because a lot of my master's is on sort of communities of practice and how people work together. So it's all very interesting. So sort of going back to something we talked about earlier, when you were working on the apprenticeships and things like that, a big part of moving from sort of graduate schemes and the sort of traditional routes into project management into apprenticeships and other ways is it's going to change the makeup of the project management community. It's going to make it more diverse and sort of change the type of people that are doing it. What sort of impact do you think that's going to have on the profession?
I mean, I think it only has a positive impact. You know, we new ideas, new approaches, new outlooks can only be a good thing. And it's if we were to look at the very definition of a professional practice, that's how we do it. We keep that going. And I think being more diverse as organisations and being more diverse as a profession, again, is only a good thing. How we do that is important, and I think the way in which we manage that is important. And there are some quite vital questions we all have to ask ourselves around that. But in sort of the general view, is diversity a good thing? Of course it is. And as we as a country and as a profession change in our makeup, so should those that serve them.
Yeah, and I think, but part of it is that you can't really force it. You can't just sort of say, right, we're going to have twice as many women now, so we'll get up to 50%. You've kind of got to do it softly, and by making, and this is something you've said to me before, so I am just stealing your idea, but that you've got to make it accessible to those other people, because if you create a profession where the only way into it is by going to Oxbridge, only Oxbridge people are going to do it. Whereas if you have all these different routes, it does make it more accessible to the different people. What sort of vision do you have for the profession going forward to sort of widen it?
Yeah, good question, and I know I'm conscious of the fact that I'm sat here as a male, a white male, sort of pontificating on the views of inclusion and diversity. But I think that it's we have to do it. It's not a question of is it a good thing, is it a bad thing? We have to do it, and we have to make it accessible, and we have to make it inclusive. I think the point you made there is a very good one, which is that we can't force it. It's very easy to set an arbitrary target. So, one that's been in the media quite a lot in recent times has been around, more women on boards of companies, and that's absolutely the right thing to do. However, if you start saying, well, actually, I want, a third, or I want a half, or I want 2/3 of your board to be made up of women by 2020, well, great. That will happen because you've set an arbitrary target, and people will always hit an arbitrary target. But then the question has to be, have they done that in a sustainable way? And have they done that in the right way? Or have they gone too far on the compass towards positive discrimination, which is not what we want, because actually that predisposes that the organisation is in the right place and is an inclusive organisation. So it's a harder question to answer, and it's a longer response that we then have to plan out. But we have to look at how do we make organisations, teams, professions more accessible? How do we make them more inclusive? And if we do that, then diversity of ideas, of people, and of culture come as a nice byproduct. But only if we ask those questions. If we start at the diversity side, yes, we will get more diverse organisations, but not necessarily in a sustainable way. Says I, as a white male in his mid-30s.
But I do think that you need the people with the you need the people with the privilege to fight the fight too, because they're quite often the ones with the power and the ones with the respect, that sort of, when people have got these unconscious biases, you do need, it's like in meetings, the whole thing with women in meetings, how that when a woman says something, obviously this doesn't happen all the time in any way, but I've seen it happen where a woman will say something, and then a man will say the same thing again, copying them, and they'll be the one to get the credit because they've just said it with a little bit more strength, or just people's unconscious biases respect them a little bit more. And sometimes it is their place to go, oh, but actually I am just saying what the woman said, and just to double check things and just make sure they are just to make sure that they are being fair and are looking, they are being fair.
I think you're spot on. And for a period of my life, I worked abroad, which gave a very acute lens to look at this through. So I actually gave a talk to the APM on project management as a common language from my work abroad, where different cultures have different ways of approaching things and different ways of working together. And one example, in China, they never said no, which is really tough when you're trying to find out if people understand things. And certainly my first few days there, I'm sort of briefing and saying, so is everyone clear on that? Is everyone happy with that? And they're all going, yes, yes, yes. And off they go. And it doesn't go quite well. So you bring them back and say, okay, so that doesn't seem to be working. You said you understood. Which bits didn't you understand? And then there's a bit of talking. And then what you find is there are some subtle sort of leaders in the group who sort of step forward and give you the lowdown. But it was afterwards that someone said that they will never say no. You've got to find a different way of getting that information. So in a way, I've got to completely change my behaviour in order to get the best from my team. I think as leaders, we should always be asking that question: what do I need to do to make my team perform better, or to make them perform the way that they need to be performing? I'm very much of the view that as a leader, my job is to remove things that block people from doing their best work, and add in things that help them do their best work, and then stay out of their way and let this team of people, who I have to assume are there because they are qualified and experienced and the right people for the job, and let them do their best work and stay out of their way. So I think that, as we go towards that more inclusive way of thinking, we do have to start adapting perhaps the way that we speak, the way that we set up meetings, the way that we perform in order to get that diversity of ideas and challenge. And it can be little things. I mean, I recently did a cabinet office assurance review where, traditionally you might walk in as someone being reviewed and you'll find a team of 3 or 4 or 5 people behind a table, and you've got one chair opposite them. That automatically puts people on edge. It puts people in a very sort of adrenaline kind of filled environment. You can see them clamming up. Whereas I take the view of actually, we all sit around a table, so it's more like a meeting. It's more inclusive. I'm able to get more ideas from people, and that's just a very easy thing we can do to change our approach. And in doing that, we should be able to get the best of our people.
And I think that's one of the big things is when you're used to being in the majority, you're used to the way things have always been done. It's always been that three of us sit on one side and then we interview the person on the other side. Because actually, I was just thinking that the job interviews I've been in recently, a lot more of them have been at sort of small round tables or in places that have got sort of soft chairs rather than a sort of a scary interview table and chairs. And that's definitely something that's changing. And sort of going back to the China example as well, we're quite a low context society. I'm definitely someone who I will say what I'm thinking. If I don't understand, I'll go, what? Whereas a lot of other people and societies, and there's a whole spectrum, so people who you think are very like you may be very different in that when they don't understand, rather than saying I don't understand, it'll be in their body movement, it'll be in something really subtle that once you get to know them, you'll be able to see it. But until then, you've kind of got to double check and be aware of what things that you may not be seeing.
Absolutely, and some of those cultural influences, as project management goes wider and does more things in more places, we have to be aware of that. We have to be mindful of that. I'm using the international lens there, but I would say in any organisation you have to be mindful of that is everyone in your team having a fair opportunity to contribute and to air their views and to have that challenge. And if they're not, we've got to find various ways of doing that. I've hosted conferences where we've used conference walls. So we've got a wall of anonymous feedback or anonymous questions, because there may be people who don't want to ask the question of the managing director, why aren't we doing enough in this space? They might feel they don't want to ask that question. Not necessarily because the managing director, it might be because they're more worried about how their peers or how their direct management might feel about that. So actually by making it anonymous, you tend to find you get some interesting views and some interesting questions. And it's all ways that we as leaders have to just adapt the way we go about things in order to make sure that we get the best of our people. Because they're not doing anything out of malice or out of not caring. It's just that we haven't created the right environment for them to deliver that success. So we have to do that. We have to help do that for them.
Yes, and as the person sort of creating a team or leading a team, in reality, if you want to get the best out of them, you do need to be the one who adapts your methods. You can't just expect them to adapt to your methods all the time. Like, there may be a bit of yin and yang, but you need to be the one to be ready to understand how they think. Oh yeah,
and that's the toughest thing, and it's certainly one that I've challenged myself on a number of times when you've got a clear idea of what you want and how you want it done, so you kind of portray that, and then you start to see all the other things coming into the fray, and you sort of, first of all, you feel a bit under attack. You think, hang on a minute, that's not what I asked for, and then you sort of think, well, hang on, why are they doing that? And then eventually you hopefully end up at the place where you say, well, actually, let me look at this more clearly, and let's go back to the table and decide how best to do it. I think it depends on the environment. I mean, in some cases, it's not open for debate. So certainly some of the jobs I've held have been safety critical environments where, something's happening. I haven't got time necessarily to debate it. I'm telling you to go and do something. And that's where trust in your leader comes to the forefront. So do your team trust your credibility and trust that you're looking out for them and for the end result, in which case they go, yeah, okay, I'll do that. But they know that you've created the environment where afterwards you'll get together and say, right, this is why I did it that way. Let's discuss it, and if there's a better way of doing it, then we can change that. But in a general environment, I would say in the vast majority of project management examples, we're not doing something that's going to put lives at risk or put whole organisations at risk. So that we should be perhaps taking a more, I think collaborative approach is the wrong word, because leadership is about actually setting that pace. But I certainly think that at regular points we should be eager, and I think the phrase is perpetually curious. That actually we're always thinking, was that the best way of doing it? And the people that will tell you the answer to that question are the people closest to it. So they'll be your team, and in some cases it might not be the direct team, it might be people closer to the coalface, to coin a phrase, that will have those answers, and we should go and seek those answers out.
Yes, and I think I was talking about stakeholder management with someone a couple of weeks ago, and the thing about stakeholder management is it's iterative, and that a lot of people sort of talk to their stakeholders, maybe listen to them, but don't think about the fact that you've then got to talk to them again, and then listen to them again, and then get that feedback loop going, so that you know how your communications or how your project or whatever it is you're managing is going well. And you can only do that by properly listening and trying to listen with their frame of reference rather than just your own.
Absolutely. I mean, the last project I've been working on was around opening up data, I took the view that I wanted it to be open policy. So this would be policy generated by government that would be open to all. Mm-hmm. So everybody could access it at any time. It'd be all public. They can contribute, they can ask questions, they can come to the events, all of that. And it's to try and re-emphasize that, as you say, people do some really weird things. Someone will say, yes, I agree with you completely one day, and then the next day they go, no, I don't agree at all. And we sometimes as project professionals sit in the middle and go, well, they're just crazy. I'm not going to listen to that. I'm just going to carry on. Whereas actually what we're going to look at is, well, what's changed? So when we ask, if we've just given them, say, a 2-hour briefing and then said, do you agree with this, yes or no? They might not have had time to digest it all yet. They might not have had time to test their understanding. How many times have we been in meetings where, in the heat of the moment, we've done things, and it's afterwards, maybe on the journey home or when we're in the pub afterwards, we thought, oh, I wish I'd said whatever. And that's because we're powered by chemicals as people. We're all drug addicts, actually, and it's dependent on which levels we've got. Is it higher levels of dopamine or is it higher levels of adrenaline?
Yeah.
And actually, it's when the adrenaline level comes down, we don't feel under threat. The big intelligent part of our brain kicks in. We start to think about it, and then we go, yes. So when it comes to stakeholder management, we really have to bear that in mind. And actually, it's Eddie Obeng, The World After Midnight. People can check that out on TED Talks or can actually go and buy his book. He talks about that a lot, which is actually, people do some really weird things, and you have to constantly check back in. And I think it just makes good sense as project professionals. We should never, just say, well, we'll do that consultation, get the tick in the box, right, that's it, we're off. That isn't the case. We've got to find ways of getting that continuous feedback and continuous consultation. Not with a view of necessarily making more people agree with us, because normally once the statistics have fell, they've fell, and they're not going to change too much. But it's about actually making sure that we are still on the right track. In particular, those mega projects, so big, huge projects. The world changes whilst we're delivering. Whilst we might have done a bit of engagement before the design, we go and do the design, and then there's almost that kind of, well, we'll go straight into delivery. Well, hang on a second. Are we sure that what we've come up with is what they needed? And are we sure it's what they needed and still need, given that the world may have changed around us? So it's
sorry. And it's who needed it, because one person may think it should look one way and another person may think it may look the other way, and they're both within the customer organisation. And I sort of see, I was, as you were saying that, my train of thought was sort of going, when I'm making decisions that affect a large group of people, it's not about what you think is best. It's almost like a crowdsourcing what the consensus is best. But obviously you've got to be careful, because some people don't actually know what's best. It's what they think is best. And it's quite of what sort of the project outcome should be, or what the project success criteria should be.
Yeah, absolutely. And, famous quote alert, but, it's Martin Luther King who said that a genuine leader is not a seeker of consensus, but a molder of consensus. And I think that holds, even truer meaning in a project management framing, where actually if you just go and seek out consensus, you probably find it actually. But actually what you've got to do is get that group of people together. You've got to get their views, go away, articulate something, go back, and expect a challenge. We should welcome it. We should welcome that challenge. But what we should find is that if someone disagrees with you and they just say, Sorrel, that is the wrong decision, fine, okay, they disagree with you. If you then talk them through your thinking and how you've got to an answer, at the end of it, they might still say, I completely disagree with you, but actually I understand how you got there, so I'm fine with it. Mm-hmm. So you've got that consensus, you've molded that consensus. They still don't agree with you and they don't agree with your project, but they know why you got there and they can respect that and they understand that. And that to me sometimes is good enough. You know, if as long as, of course, if you're delivering a project and you have got that kind of 80-20 split or 70-30 split, if you're in a situation where only sort of 20 or 30% agree with you, then there's probably something more you need to be doing. But we shouldn't sort of completely obsess over everyone's got to agree with this. I need 100% agreement. You're never going to get 100% agreement. What you need to get is 100% of people understanding what it is you're delivering, why you're delivering it, and how you came up with your solution as a way of delivering it.
Yes, basically. That's perfect.
That's it. All projects will succeed. We can all go home.
Yep. But it does come to show that, in my opinion anyway, project management is really about the people. You can then go off and make all of these nice drawings and plans, but it's about the people and getting people to understand what's going on and keeping them happy.
Yeah, I mean, people make or break projects. You know, it's well known. We all understand that, and I'm sure there are many people listening to this that have sat in, you know, training sessions or seminars or talks or lectures or whatever it might be, and we'll all sit there and nod and go, "Yeah, you're absolutely right." But do we actually change anything when we go away, or do we just sort of get back into the mill of the day job? I think if we accept that people make or break projects, then we should put people at the top of any of our lists, and people should be our first and last thought. And within people is obviously your team, your supply chain, the people who are delivering for you, plus your stakeholders, plus your client and customer groups. And it's huge. I mean, it's huge. I mean, it's difficult. You have to have a lot of stamina to be a project professional, a huge amount of stamina, because it is exhausting. And particularly because in some of the more emotive projects, you end up actually carrying around people's emotional baggage as well, which can be really quite tough. But hey, that's why we picked project management. Or hopefully we picked project management.
Oh yeah, well, unless you just fell into it, which a lot of people do. So, but hopefully they're still of that mindset. So going back a little bit to accessibility and diversity, to have a diverse and accessible profession, you have to do it well. I was talking to my dad actually, who he works in special educational needs, and I have done in the past as well. And we were talking about things like conferences and education and the sort of things that the APM does. And we were saying that to make it diverse and to make it accessible to, in our context, we were talking about people with Asperger's and ADHD and dyslexia who are high functioning. You do just have to make them really good qualifications, really good events, with quiet spaces, which I personally think everyone wants a quiet space at a big conference. Find me someone who doesn't want 5 minutes in a quiet room. I'm just turning this into a rant now rather than something that's going to become a conversation.
Rant away. It's a good rant to have.
Oh, I love it. And that something I see with project management is it's still seen as more project controls than project management. I think you've got the two ends of the spectrum as a career. You've got the project controllers who are almost like seen as accountants or spreadsheet people. And then you've got the project managers who are almost seen as strategic leaders. And the profession at the moment is joining in the middle to have a whole spectrum of people working across projects. And it's going to be interesting to see sort of how the profession reacts to that, because I think they've got some, like Chartered, I think is really good for the higher end, and then they're developing a really good sort of apprenticeship standard for the bottom. And it's going to be interesting to see how they bring that across to the masses who actually, because actually I think there are a lot of people who are in that sort of solid project management role in the middle who want support from the APM. And it's going to be interesting to see how they make that happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm conscious that that's my response to every one of your questions. Yes, absolutely. But you know, if we look at why projects fail, we'll find two broad answers. One, we didn't get the planning right. Two, we didn't get the people right. And we know this. We know this as a profession. I've read some of the statistics from the recent IPA reviews of various public projects, and that's broadly the two categories that things fall into. So either we've got the planning wrong or we've got the people wrong. So you're quite right. At the project controls sort of area, it's very much, I don't want to say paint by numbers, because that would be downplaying the work they do, because actually they are vital. I mean, they really are quite vital. And we have to get the planning right. One of my pet hates at the moment is, so London 2012, still spoken about now, even though there's been another Olympics since, we still talk about it. London 2012, if we looked at that holistically, it was over the budget we set. We know that but it was delivered on time, and it was delivered to the quality. And actually, when we look at the learning legacy and the legacy items that exist now as an outcome of that, we can only see London 2012 as a success.
Yes. Wasn't it the first Olympics where no one died in creating it?
Yeah,
that's actually quite shocking, really.
Yeah, and that's down to the leadership. The leadership, set that pace and set that dynamic. And they also, I did a bit of work on that, and it was very clear that everybody was under one brand, London 2012. It wasn't, this contractor or that contractor. We were all London 2012, and that's really the important thing, that we're all working towards this bigger goal and to this bigger brand. But that succeeded because we've got the people bit right and we've got the controls bit right. And what's irritated me a little bit around some of the bigger projects now is, we're starting to get things through now that we've got the rebuild of the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium that hasn't gone quite according to plan. We're now getting news that Crossrail isn't necessarily going to plan because of various issues. HS2 also having some issues there as well. And I'm forced to ask the question: well, where if we could get it right with London 2012, why aren't we getting it right as a profession? So not an organisation or a particular project, but if we could get it right as a profession in London 2012, what have we not done, or what have we not digested for these other projects, that now don't seem to be going as well? And I think we're going to find the same answers. It's going to be down to the planning or the people, and I think it's because they're so disparate sometimes that the two. It goes back to the point you were making, that the two don't seem to join. And actually, if you get the planning right and embed it and have it as a cultural thing throughout the life cycle of the project, you should be successful. And if you have the people thing right from the beginning, embedded all the way through, again, you should get it right. And I think as a profession, we need to have some good, hard kind of conversations with ourselves about how we make that happen. I think apprenticeship standards are a way of doing it. I think cross-pollination is critical. And I think as the profession grows and we get to see that actually there is a portability of skills, there is a portability of experience, we should see people moving across the different sectors. So if you've been a successful construction project manager, why can't you be a successful transformation project manager in finance, for example, or why can't you go and manage a retail project? There should be no reason why not.
Yeah,
it's
definitely.
The context. We have to learn the context, but that's the only thing that we would have to learn, and then that's about your behaviours, about how adaptable you are and how open you are to learning about new contexts. So I think the more that we do that, and the more that we get that common baseline, if that's the right word, across the various sectors, I think we'll see that improve. But at the moment, there does seem to be this general rule that we either get the planning bit wrong, which you could narrow on call the controls bit, or we get the people bit wrong around stakeholder management. And we've really got to try and lock that bit away. Otherwise, we as a profession, aren't going to be perceived as learning our own lessons, which we preach that lesson. So we've got to do it.
But my question there is, I'm going to phrase this as a statement rather than a question, but I don't think we're learning lessons across the profession as a whole. I think lessons learned are really within organisations, and even within parts of organisations. They're not being shared across. They're not being seen as applicable to different types of projects. They're just seen as, because projects are unique, and I think people get stuck on that and think, well, that project's unique and our project's unique, therefore there won't be lessons to learn, when there really are.
Yeah, no, and you're right there as well. I mean, lessons learned is something that well, first of all, a lot of organisations do lessons learned at the end. Mm-hmm. So they either do it at the end of a stage of a project, or they do it at the very end of the project, and that's too late. That's just too late. Or we talk about how we must learn our lessons. Well, what are we doing to capture them? And it can't be just that we've got an IT system somewhere that we type up our lessons learned and we put them on a shared area and that's it. That isn't good enough. And we have to look at the dynamic learning model and how we can use that within organisations and within the profession and our communities of practice. The way that NASA have done that in the past, really shows. Yeah. And they learned some pretty horrific lessons. When they've got space shuttles crashing and so forth. They had to learn because they had to learn that things were going seriously wrong. But what came out of it was then a culture of learning and of challenging and of making sure that we got it right and applying those lessons either as soon as possible or certainly in the new projects. And I think the question should always be, rather than a statistic of how many lessons learned did you capture from that project, how many lessons have you applied to that project? So when you started your project, what lessons learned did you go and get from other people and then apply to your project? And if the answer to that is no, you are potentially not setting yourself up to succeed from day one. It's about the lessons we apply as much as the lessons we learn. And actually, I think that we should change the phraseology almost, that it's lessons captured, lessons learned, and lessons applied. And if we were to almost see it in that way, then it would stop us thinking, yes, we've recorded lessons learned. Well, it's only learned when it's learned. And if we're still doing it the way we were doing it before, then clearly we haven't learned that lesson. So, it goes back to the child that burns themselves in a fire. You quickly learn, oh, that hurt, I'm not going to do that again. If the child kept doing it, you go, hang on a minute, what's going on here? You've got to learn that lesson. So yeah, I think we as organisations and we as a profession have got to set that tone and have got to set the conditions for that to happen.
Yeah, definitely. And but it needs to be done, I think, at an organisational level. There needs to be some more collaborative agreements, because I know there's definitely one at the moment between BAE and I think it's HS2. They're getting together and as two sort of companies that do major programmes to understand lessons from each other, and they're very different industries. I know BAE does a bit of sort of infrastructure and things, but they do very different things. But that is also something that the APM could be and should be facilitating, and sort of trying to join higher level people in organisations who are they're specialist in project controls or PMOs, and trying to bring them together, which maybe is what the specific interest groups should also be doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if I would ask. I mean, I know there are certainly from the corporate partners and so forth that they get together on a regular basis. But I think we need to be doing more of that. I mean, the Major Projects Association do some great work in that space as well. I'm quite involved with some of the work they do. But there is clearly an opportunity there for the APM to sort of garner and nurture that cultural shift. And I think we should be doing more of it. How that's done, I don't quite know. I think that's an open question for the members to help us understand that. But at the end of the day, if we think of how many members if we think of how many members there are, and how many lessons they'd each have, if every member just had like 10 top points that they've learned in their career so far, and there's circa over 18,000 members, that's a hell of a lot of lessons learned that we need to capture.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So before we finish, what is your final message?
So my main message, I think, right now is that project management is going places. We all know that it is. And because of that, we need to make sure that we've got the right balance and the right people and the right ideas coming right from the top, right at the board of trustees at the professional body. And so I think that it's just really important that everybody out there who's a full member or a fellow who has that vote make sure that they use it this year round, because it is really critical in how we're now going to take chartership forward to the next level.
Thank you for listening to Sorrel's PM Times. If you want to contact either of us, we both have Twitter. Mine is times_PM, and Darren's is Darren Jaudrill. It's just his name, basically. I'll put links to both of our Twitters and LinkedIn pages in the show notes. Bye!